a malevolent presence of Russia looking over their shoulder. Now, Russia is the prime wrongdoer, going right back to Stalin. And Armenia has made the mistake of being part of a Russian treaty, and Russia has let it down. Russia has betrayed Armenia. It's got its own forces it's got a base in Armenia, but it sells billions of arms to Azerbaijan.
And then maybe, can we compare and contrast the CSTO and the ISCC? Where do they have teeth? Are they a paperless tiger? Or do they have teeth?
Which organizations?
ICC and the CSTO, so Russia's treaty. If Armenia proper is attacked, which is already being attacked, we remember Barkinis and other key region, then Russia has to intervene. So the question is, will Russia intervene if Armenia is being attacked? And what benefit would Armenia have if the ICC intervenes? We have young Azeris fighting, like with the banner of nationalism. They are furious. So if they just go on to attack, what mechanisms are available to prevent?
It's up to Armenia. It could, in 5 minutes, sign up, ratify the ICC treaty. It signed it, but it hasn't ratified it. So if it wants immediate action, investigation of Azeri war crimes, it must sign that treaty. Otherwise, the only way to have international investigation of the war crimes is through the Security Council. And there Russia has a veto. And I think that the Russian response has been negligible and negligent, and any prospect, Putin has washed his hands of Nagorno-Karabakh. That's the problem with any treaty with Russia. And I think for the future, Armenia must move away from the Russian sphere of influence, because this is what it's got from it.
But then can you provide an argument for the ICC? Okay, investigation, fine. But how can the ICC protect Armenia from another genocide, from continued war crimes?
Well, that's its task. That's its job. And we've got to start somewhere.
We know that we have Syrian mercenaries paid by Turkish security forces. What can it do if further F-16s just bombard Nagorno-Karabakh, even if Armenia ratified the ICC and asked for an investigation? How can ICC stop the crimes?
Well, it can't. Nothing can. The only body that can stop aggression taking place is the Security Council. And Russia, the pathetic and wicked Russia, who's held out so much to Armenia and has not hasn't lifted a finger to help it. The Security Council could stop it by its chapters, what we call its Chapter 7 powers of intervention to keep the peace. Now, that could involve, and I hesitate to say it because the only power really that can stop this war of aggression is NATO. And so NATO would have to be asked by the Security Council. But quite frankly, it's a war which no one is setting out to stop. The Armenian government has tried to get an order from the European Court of Human Rights. The the Azeris are part of that. And that is something that there is a right to life that everyone that is part of the convention has, and that is being put at risk by the Azeris. And so there may be an order from the European Court. These may be straws to be clutched at, because they are straws, but they do have the force of law, and they mean Azerbaijan will never be forgiven, particularly if it's found guilty of incitement to genocide, or to acquire crimes against humanity, or to aggression. So, in a sense, activating these mechanisms, which have no force of guns behind them, but have the force of law, is some protection in the future of requiring maybe restitution and compensation. But how can you stop a war? Only the Security Council has that power. And even then, it can be blocked by any one of 5 big countries, including Russia.
And what about Turkey? Turkey is a NATO member.
No, it's not one of the big 5. The big 5 in the Security Council are those Britain, France, America, Russia, and China. Any one of them can veto any action. That is the power shape. America should be active in support because it has a very strong diaspora presence of Armenians, but America is out of action for the next week.
And then allow us to understand, we highlighted international resolution mechanisms, UN Security Council, International Court of Justice, NATO. And we determined that if there's a will to continue the war on the Azeri side, on the Russian side, there's not much that can be really done. But what are bilateral actions that can be taken? How can, say, Britain or Germany be involved on their own, within their own framework?
Well, as I've said, Germany has seen the light over the 1993 UN resolutions, and that's a good sign. And it is part of the Minsk process. I think that Britain is not, but it does have an interest, obviously, in good relations with both countries. It has we have a national church of England, which is a Christian church and has many links historically with the churches. And we have a lot of trade with Azerbaijan. So instead of wringing its hands, the British government could start making noises about trade boycotts and so forth if the Azeris do not agree to enter a peace process. We also have what is called a Magnitsky Act, which America, Canada, and soon Europe will have, that enables particular individuals guilty of human rights abuse to have their assets seized, to be unable to enter the country, to be named, shamed, and blamed. And I think that it's time that we started adding President Aliyev to Magnitsky Act, and we've just done that to the Belarus President Lukashenko, and we might well do it to Aliyev, and so might America and Europe when it gets its act together, which it promises early next year. So sanctions are another possibility. Russia is particularly despicable because it keeps selling its arms to Azerbaijan to kill Armenians, and that's another reason why Armenians should rethink their relationship with Russia.
And is it any possibility to put sanctions again on Russia on the because of the arms sale to Azerbaijan during this time?
It is possible, but that is a UN question probably, and no one in this, I mean, this has happened at this time because every will is weakened by COVID. It's a time where action of this against powerful countries has to be weighed with overall rightful obsession with dealing with the virus. I don't think Azerbaijan would have attacked last year or next year. It just happened to be a time where Armenia was weakened, and it was an opportunistic attack which must be halted. And Azerbaijan must suffer. It really must, because it's an international criminal and it's a crime of aggression, and Aliyev must hopefully eventually, maybe in 20 years' time, be put in the dock and spend the rest of his life in prison.
And then, as a human rights barrister, I think you can help us here. Oftentimes in international media, and I'm even calling out BBC, Hard Talk, Deutsche Welle, the reporter appeared to not really understand the differences between international law and right to self-determination. They appear in their questions to equalize Azerbaijan and Armenia as two equals. And can
Yes.
you really make a case to
Well, they've never been to Nagorno-Karabakh. They're not lawyers. They don't understand. They think that the 1993 resolutions state international law. They were never meant to. They, in context, they were part of a peace offering. They were never any investigation into whether Nagorno-Karabakh had self-determination or not. It's a farce, and it's wrong to think of the 1993 resolutions as making Nagorno-Karabakh a part. It was never a part, even in Stalin's description as an autonomous oblast. It always was intended to have autonomy, and that's translated by now into independence or right for remedial secession. And so, of course, reporters have never been to see the wonderful Christian churches of 1,000 years ago that are still there. They've never seen the functioning democracy. They've never appreciated that it's got an entirely independent and pretty fair judicial system. And so it's easy for ignorant people to consign it to destruction on the basis that, oh, it really belongs to Azerbaijan. It's never belonged to Azerbaijan, and there is a rich culture and national spirit that is entirely Karabakian Armenian.
And then I think, like you described it quite well. Do you remember in 2019 the Munich Security Conference when they put Mr. Aliyev and Mr. Pashinyan on a panel, the disaster, how it really translated into the international perspective of these two warring parties.
Yes, that's why there needs to be an independent study and probably a court case in the International Court of Justice to decide the issue. My view is, and I'm, as I say, an Australian with no dog in the fight, is that Nagorno-Karabakh is entitled to self-determination and secession.
And then as we are moving to the final part of our conversation today, in the beginning, you highlighted that we need a ceasefire. But what is then? Because a ceasefire also implies a return to a frozen conflict. How can we achieve a lasting solution? What would be the next steps after a ceasefire is agreed?
Well, I'm all for a frozen conflict as an alternative to a red-hot, fiery conflict that we have at the moment. So, yes, let's go back, let's regroup, let's allow the people of Nagorno-Karabakh a degree of peaceful life while we sort out the future. Now, to any objective observer, the future has to be, one, the right of Nagorno-Karabakh to exist, either as an independent country or as part of Armenia. And secondly, its withdrawal from a number of buffer zones that are legitimately Azerbaijani, and you can effect some population transfers to achieve that. That's the obvious solution. If you've been there, as I have, it seems to me to be possible with a degree of iron will, when you slap down both Armenia and Azerbaijan and tell Turkey to get out of the way, and have a revaluation so that Nagorno-Karabakh, as I say, I think it should be a province of Armenia. That's probably its best protection. And other areas that the Armenians took in 1994 could be returned to Azerbaijan. That's the kind of solution that this cries out for. But let me tell you, having been there, as very few commentators and journalists have, that this is a precious part of the world. It has the traces of a religious Armenian civilization that goes back to 300 AD. It's a beautiful little part of the world with its own spirit and history, and we just should not allow it to be snuffed out. It should be a World Heritage Area which is protected from the racial hatreds that have marked these two countries.
I like your comment of we should not let it be snuffed out. But here again, yes, of course, there's a sovereign rule, but what can civil society do? Human rights baristas as yourself, activists, what can they do to protect and preserve this precious part of the world?
Well, at the moment, all they can do is advocate for sanctions, investigations in relation to the war to stop Azerbaijan. They can look at ways in which their own governments can sanction Azerbaijan for continuing it. Governments themselves can take that initiative at the behest of their civil societies, because what we're seeing is a special and unique part of this world, small though it is, about to be annihilated, just as we worry about the coral on the barrier reef or whatever. We've got to recognize that these people, 170,000 of them, are the custodians of an extraordinary heritage and spirit and are entitled. They won through their own courage of their people, their right to independence, and we should give it to them, while at the same time subtracting some of the areas that can properly be given back to Azerbaijan. That should not be beyond our wit in 2020.
And so, frankly, it's a question of parliaments. If we see what has been happening with social movements, Black Lives Matter, women's rights, do you think if people go to the street for Nagorno-Karabakh across the world, demanding their parliaments to put a demand, to put a secession, to put it, to discuss it in the parliament, can this have an impact? Is this something we should strive for? Should we mobilize civic society to go on the streets and protest for Nagorno-Karabakh?
Well, I think we must understand that perhaps it's a criticism of Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh that they haven't made the case. They haven't, no one knows about Nagorno-Karabakh until this conflict. Then maybe that's a good thing. Maybe in a sense, because it's put Nagorno-Karabakh on the world map, we can now talk about how precious it is and how it should be preserved.
Dear Mr. Robertson, I warmly thank you for your insightful words and perspectives. And it was our pleasure to host you here at Faces of Armenia. And we invite you to drop any concluding remarks or words with our audience.
Thank you very much for having me.